Welcome back. This is the second part of our series on citations and the like. This time we're going to be looking at sources and what is a good source, what is a bad source, and looking at a few of these. So sources one, what is a primary source? A primary source are journal articles, reports of a specific scientific experiment. They are stuff that a person did that is reporting their data. It's not secondhand knowledge, it's primary knowledge. This is often known as a journal article, and there are two journal articles that are attached to this in Blackboard that I would like you to review. We don't need it for this video, I don't think, but definitely for the next one, we'll need to take a look at those. And typically, these sources contain a full IMRAD breakdown of a specific study and often has an abstract to them. We consider this to be a journal article or a research article. There are also reviews, which is a type of scientific paper that usually seeks to answer or summarize the current state or understanding on a specific topic. We're not talking about novel or new research here. We are simply surmising the current state, and often a review can be a wonderful resource, especially if you're talking about something that you're not normally used to. It can be a great resource to dip your toes into research, and a great review is worth every single penny. This means that these are often also sort of down the rabbit hole type things where you have maybe 50 or 60 different papers, and then those lead off to different paths and different things. So sometimes you have to come back, especially if it's something that you're really interested in. But they themselves are a great resource. Now, how do we tell the difference between the two? Well, let's take a look here at some papers that we are going to look at. In this case, this is Jones and Oliver, and this is definitely a review. It says review right in the title. It says mini review. Whereas this one here, Chen et al., is not. It is a comparative genome analysis of Vibrio vulnificus. And the difference is, this one here, the Jones and Oliver from Infection and Immunology, this one seeks to look at what is available regarding Vibrio vulnificus, specifically its pathogenesis, and how it becomes a pathogen and the like. And if we take a look, this here's the introduction. And right here, overall, Vibrio vulnificus is a complex organism with physiological characteristics that contribute to its survival in the marine environment and its human host. That is our statement. And the rest of this review is looking at different aspects of Vibrio vulnificus in that mindset. So if we take a look then, since this is a review, down here at the very bottom, we have all of our different papers, and look at the bibliography. Because this is a review and it's looking at all the current research that is having to do with Vibrio vulnificus, there are 170 different references. Compare that to this one, which this one also has a fair amount of references. It has about a third of that. That is the difference here. A review is very much the gateway to a lot of these papers, to a lot of this information. Reviews are great if they're done well. A bad review is really bad, though. I personally like this mini review here. It's one of the reasons I gave it to you, is that it's short, sweet, to the point. And I like it. Now, those are still scientific literature. Both a scientific paper, novel research, and a review is scientific literature. And that is different than, say, a article from Time magazine or something of that nature. Now back to our PowerPoint. A review itself is what's known as secondary sources. It's information that was created after the original content. The person who does the research and finds out the thing, whatever that may be. That is a primary source. A secondary source is information that was assembled, created later, sometimes with, but more often than not, without firsthand experience. Typically, these have less technical jargon, but they are not as robust. So a lot of times you might start off with a review, but when you're citing, you don't cite the review. You cite a lot of the papers that the review also cites because that's where the review went to. In our case, you can cite reviews. If you were to cite a review for your unknown project, that's perfectly fine. But we often would like to see novel research cited rather than reviews themselves. And these are also different than things for the lay. Lay often has a context of unknowing when really it just means not in the sphere. So the majority of people you will interact with are lay. They are not in the sphere of science. Whether that be your parents, whether that be other scientists, whether that be people you meet on the street. These are people who don't have the technical expertise you do. So having them look at jargon, it can be quite difficult. This also goes from location to location, and more specifically, when we're looking at different types of scientific fields here, the jargon can be quite daunting. If you are a fisheries person, you might not exactly know what the jargon is for genetics and genomics. And if you're a genomics person, you might not know what the jargon is for oyster reef restoration. And it can be quite daunting sometimes to figure out and sort of cut through the language barrier. So we have these sources, we have these ideas. Where do we find sources? Well, these are live links. The first one right here, hopefully should work when I click it. And I'm going to bring it over to the proper. Goes to our library here at A&M Corpus Christi. And we have research guides, journals, course reserves, and databases. Databases will take you to this place where you can look up different journals, different databases for different things, the ACM Digital Library, African American Archives. There's a lot here. There's also another place, which I'm just going to type it in instead of following the hyperlink. And that is going to be right here, scholar.google.com. This is Google Scholar, and you can type in, you can see what I've looked up for recently. Let's look at cholera, Vibrio cholerae. Just cholera gives you a ton of resources here. And this is, you can notice that some of these, like JSTOR has free versions, SciLOSP has free versions, and some of them, like this one here, you can actually find at A&M Corpus. What's nice about Google Scholar, if you're logged into a university account, it will generally tell you whether or not you can get it at your university. So what is a database? A database is a collection of sources typically created by a university or by a professional. In our case, at TAMU-CC, you have the library, and I would recommend seeking out one of the scientific librarians at the library if you're having a hard time finding sources or if it seems daunting. It can be very daunting. We are in the information age. There is more information at our fingertips now than ever before. Finding sources is not as difficult as it used to be. But that means there's a lot of information available to us all at one time. So now let's address the wiki in the room. Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not, I repeat, not an acceptable source. Okay? Not at all. Why is it not an acceptable source? Well, anyone can edit Wikipedia. You can put whatever you want on Wikipedia. That doesn't mean that it's accurate. So what are some good sources? Primary sources, secondary trusted sources. If we're talking newspaper clippings, if appropriate, do it from a newspaper that you know and trust and you know is not biased. We're going to go through some of the biased ones later. News articles that should be. Technical reports are also good aspects. Anything with a .gov address is usually pretty good. Anything with a .edu is generally pretty good. Those type of things. Anything with a .com is going to be a company, and companies might not always give you accurate information. So let's talk about the information superhighway itself. As I said, we are in a wonderful state for scientific advancement because you have the information of our species, of our history at your fingertips. You can Google something and get an answer. Not necessarily the right answer, but an answer. We have access to more information now than ever before. This is good, but not all information is good information. When we're on the internet, we want to have a healthy dose of skepticism because a lot of times certain sources are not going to be good sources, especially when we get into more opinion-based sources rather than fact-based sources. So let's take a look at a few of these. Acceptable sources. Anything that with .gov is probably going to be a government website or at the very least a government report. Most educational reports from universities.edu, primary literature, where you can cite the actual journal article, where someone can go to that article and get it. Secondary literature, same thing, and in some cases, when appropriate, limited bias news sites. What do I mean by that? I mean that in the information age, and with all the information at our fingertips, there are certain information that is completely and utterly bias. Fox News, bias. CNN, bias. MSNBC, bias. They have an agenda. On the very far ends, Breitbart, very biased. On the other end, Percolately, very biased. Oftentimes, these are opinion pieces, not fact pieces. A good fact-based newspaper would be something like the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, your classic newspapers. Those are going to be your non-bias papers. And really, it all comes down to local area. If you don't know that paper, don't cite it at all. The Corpus Christi Caller-Times is pretty good. Other papers are not. So unless you know your newspaper, don't cite it. If it's a news website that you don't know about, don't cite it. If it's a known biased news site, don't cite it. If it's a wiki, don't cite it. Those are not acceptable sources.